Now it's time for Chapter 2, Resume Reconnaissance. Here's what we've got in store for this chapter. First off, we're going to have a quick review about what we've learned so far. Then we're going to move on to the next part of our relationship with the hiring manager, and that's understanding the students. Then we'll look at what actual resume reconnaissance is, and we'll break it down into the 3 different actions: internet research, personal observation, and the phone call. Then we'll wrap it up with a quick review. So let's see what we've learned so far. At this point, we know that resumes are teaching tools. Your role is the teacher. The hiring manager is your student. And your ability to fill a particular position, that's the subject. So the question here is, how can you be the best teacher? And there are 2 qualifications that really great teachers have. They understand their students, and they know their subject inside and out. If you can put these 2 things together, then you're going to be a very good teacher. We've already looked at you as a teacher, so now let's take a look at understanding your students. And let me illustrate how important this is to understand your students. Let's go ahead and pick a subject. We're going to do biology, for example. If you were to teach biology in a middle school, in high school, and in college, would you teach the same things? And would you do that teaching in the same way? The subject is the same, right? It's biology. But what's different? Because we wouldn't actually conduct the classes in the same way. The content is still biology, but the content wouldn't be the same, and it wouldn't be delivered in the same way. The difference is the students. So what we see from this example is that a good teacher is going to cater their teaching. It's going to cater what they're actually teaching depending on the student. And more importantly, what's going on is that the students have limitations. That's what the difference is. It's the capacity that the student has. A teacher in biology is going to be limited to really what they can teach and how they can teach because of the capacity of the student. Well, the hiring manager has a capacity as well, but their capacity is limited by what stands out on your resume. A middle school student is going to be able to understand certain aspects of biology, but they don't have the same capacity that a college student does. Likewise, a hiring manager has a certain capacity. It's basically limited by what is standing out on your resume, and the chances are they're not even going to read the whole resume. They're just going to scan over it. So really, it's up to you whether they're going to learn at a middle school level or at a college level. And remember, they're probably not going to read your whole resume. They're just going to scan over it. And like I said before, this doesn't mean that you can't have a generic resume, but it does mean that for a job you're really, really interested in, you've got to study your student so that you know how to teach him. And this is where resume reconnaissance comes in. In wartime, reconnaissance meant that you were going to send out a spy. They were going to collect some information about the enemy, and that spy would observe and learn everything that they could so that there were as few surprises as possible. Our task is very simple. Now, the hiring manager is not your enemy. But again, the tasks are the same. It's broken down into 3 actions: internet research, personal observation, and the phone call. What I want to do is break down each of these 3 different steps. So let's go ahead, deal with internet research first. It's pretty simple. You're just going to look around the company's homepage. What are they proud of? Look for anything that's going to give you some insight into the company. A lot of times they might even have like an organizational chart, for example, or even some business reports posted right there on their website. You want to get a feeling for the business. Try to see things from the inside. And then after you check out their homepage, do a news search. If you were to go to Google, they've got a news link. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, here's Google's homepage. If I go to news, that's going to bring up a whole bunch of, world news, local news, all kind of stuff. But if I was looking for a specific company, for example, let's look up Google and click Search News. Here I can see that Google's replying to a lawsuit There's some information on strategies and all kinds of stuff that I can find out is going on with this company. So especially if you're dealing with a high-profile company, this is a real simple way to see what is going on. And believe me, that information can arm you to properly design your resume, specifically catering it for the employer. So you want to look for some keyword terms, again, in the news section. That searches through hundreds, if not thousands, of different news sources. See what's been going on with them lately, and you want to know good news and bad news. You might see some bad news show up there that lets you know, maybe you don't want to work there. Or maybe you specialize in whatever has caused their bad news and you could help them out. You'd want to feature that in your resume. And by the way, even if they don't have a web page, make sure you still do the news search because they can still show up there. When you're done with these news searches, you'll not only be well equipped to design your resume for them, but you'll have some more insight that's going to help you in the interview process. While you're doing your research, you want to focus on two areas: motivations and changes within the company and terminology that's used in the company. If you're able to see where they're headed and you're able to speak in their language, then you're going to be able to show them what they really need to see on that resume. Let's look at an example. Let's say that you're going to be applying for a position as a civil engineer. So you see a position open for a transportation engineer. After you do some research, you find out the city where you're going to be working has some major federal funding in the works for one of the largest highway redesign projects in the U.S. What that might mean for you is that you should probably cut back on showcasing work that you've done in the mining business, and instead you should focus on roadway projects that you've worked on. Let's take a look at another one. This time you'll apply for a job as an instructor. You do your research and you find out they just came out of a major sexual harassment lawsuit. So in that case, it might be a good idea to emphasize experience that you've had with setting up sexual harassment workshops. So you look at what they're going through, and if possible, you emphasize any pertinent experience related to what that situation might be, whether it's good or bad. Now, notice that I'm saying might a lot here because at this point, we're just taking notes. You don't really know yet if this is something that you want to focus on. You're not going to know that for sure until you actually talk with the hiring manager on the phone. That comes later on, though. So remember, at this phase, we're just taking notes. But another thing to keep in mind is the terminology that's used. You might call yourself a trainer. The company you're researching, though, they might call that position a facilitator or an instructor, a teacher, even an internal consultant. The point is, though, to speak the language. You want to maximize communication, and making sure that you speak their language is one way that you can do that. So if they say facilitator or instructor, then you say facilitator or instructor. And by that, I mean you say it in your resume, in your cover letter. If they say they're looking to set up some workshops led by instructors, then you're going to format your resume accordingly. You design it for them. And the reason I've got this nice little picture of Italy here is because of the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. That's exactly what you want to do. Believe it or not, it'll make a stronger impact if you're specifically speaking in their language, letting them know, I'm an instructor. Because if that's the way that they think, that's the way you want to present yourself. And I've got a little bonus tip for you. While you're out there checking out, the various aspects of the company itself, check out the cost of living and the average pay for that position in that geographical location. This is very important if you're going to be moving, more than 50 miles or 100 miles, because you might find out that the job pays twice as much as what you're used to, but the cost of living is also a lot more. So we want to try to balance things out there, or at least know what it is that you're getting into. And all of that you can find out on the internet. So what about personal observation? This second task, this is where things get a little bit more in the creative realm. You want to find out as much as you can and then figure out how you can use that information. An example of this would be if you're a chef, then you might want to go and eat at the restaurant. That'll give you insight from another perspective before you even approach calling the manager. If you're applying for a job in loss prevention, then you might want to do some window shopping or actually go in and make some purchases. Again, these are just examples, but you need to use your creativity, go in and try to observe the company from a completely different angle, and then think of 25 words that you would emphasize in your experience. What stands out? And after you've got those 25 words, you're ready for the phone call. This is the last and probably most important phase of your recon work. You're going to call the company and ask for the hiring manager. Now, more than likely, you're not going to get through, but don't sweat it. A lot of times the hiring manager is actually shielded from the public. They're very busy and they don't want to take a whole lot of phone calls, and they don't want to take calls of people just trying to get a hold of them and sell themselves on that position. So if you can't get through to them, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and talk to the HR person, because that's probably who you're going to be directed to. And I know for some people, this is kind of a difficult task, but it's a very critical step. You want to get your name in front of that hiring manager 3 times. You're going to do that on your cover letter, on your resume, and in this phone call. Keep in mind, a lot of times the hiring manager's only going to interview people that maybe were recommended to them by peers or colleagues, or people that had enough initiative to place this call. So you almost have to be able to push a little bit in order to get yourself out in front of that stack that is piling up on their desk. And what you'll find if you do get through is that usually they're a little bit candid about the position or revealing what type of person they're looking for. So expect that. And don't be stressed out when you're in this conversation. Keep in mind that to a degree, you're also interviewing them to find out if you're going to still be interested in the job. But if you are, let them know that you're going to be moving forward, you're going to be sending the resume, and tell them that you'll give more details in an actual interview. One thing that you do want to do, though, is look for an opportunity to tell them 1 or 2 specific details about your qualifications as they relate to that specific position. And again, we're talking specifics. You don't tell them, I'm a great team leader. You tell them, 2 months ago, I put together a team of developers and led them through a major website overhaul. And if you can give specifics like that, including actual real numbers, that helps convince them that you really do know your stuff. That helps validate your testimony. So give them details. What you want to do in this phone call is present your top skills. It's what a teacher might do to let you know what you're about to learn. Remember in college, they had those lists of courses, and there would be maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs that described the course. It basically helped you decide if you wanted to sign up for that particular class. That's what this phone call is supposed to do for the hiring manager. It lets them know what they're going to learn about and gets them excited about taking the class. And you've got 3 goals for this phone call. First, you want to find out what type of person they're looking for. Second, you want to find out how the resume should be delivered. Should it be mailed? Should it be dropped off in person? Should it be emailed? Find out what they prefer. And then third, give them an overview of why you're the best person for that position, if in fact you are. And let me give you a tip. While you're on the phone, smile. Physically smile. It's a fact that that smile is reflected through your tone, and your enthusiasm is going to be felt on the other end. And you've got a lot of things that you need to keep track of here. So one thing you can do to help that is to make yourself an outline. Make yourself some notes, have a nice tablet there, and then make actual calls practicing on friends and family. Remember, though, this is an outline. It's not a script. And let me go ahead and give you some tips on the things that you want to try to put in your outline. First off, we have the greeting. And again, we're going to actually practice this on friends and family because you want it to flow very natural. You're going to introduce yourself. The things that I'm going to show you here are just points for you to follow. Again, you don't have to write down a script and do it word for word. This just kind of helps you to have a general flow. So you introduce yourself, tell them what job you're interested in, tell them how you found out about the job, and then let them know that you've got one quick question and ask them if this is a good time or if possibly you should call back later. While you're doing all this, make sure you write down the names of everyone that you speak with. You might be able to use that information later on. And a lot of times we will only be able to get through, to the human resources department. But ultimately the goal here is that we can speak with the hiring manager. Once you do get on the phone with somebody, ask them for an explanation of the job. And you're going to do that with one direct question. And it'll be a question that requires a short one-sentence answer. Something very simple. You don't want it to be a stupid question, but you do want it to be simple. And by all means, have that question written down beforehand so you know exactly what you're going to ask. A lot of companies, for example, require certification or they require specific skills. So you might ask, I was wondering if there were any essential credentials or skills needed for this position. That allows them to just come back and say, you have to be proficient in Microsoft Excel. And that might possibly open the door up to allowing you to ask another broader question. And if you can link this to your first question, that's a bonus because now you're starting a conversation. Depending on how that conversation goes, let them know that you're going to be preparing your resume for them and ask them what the ideal candidate would look like. And make sure you take notes of what their answer is. Then if you're still interested in the job, let them know that it sounds exciting and tell them why your background is perfect. You'll do this by giving them one or two pieces of your background that fit their requirements. At this point, don't try to incorporate their language if it's different than yours, if it's not familiar to you, because it'll sound fake. So just hit on the skills. You can go ahead and refer to yourself as a teacher, even if they're using the terminology instructor, because this is an actual live conversation, and you'll both be able to feel each other out. You'll know what you're talking about. But just hit on the skills that are important, the key points. And remember, don't use bragging language. You also don't want to use general terms like, I'm great with PowerPoint. You want to give them specific facts and details. For example, say, I created a presentation that was used in a national campaign, delivered to 200 social workers. That gives them real numbers, and that establishes credibility. Be honest with yourself and with them. If your skill set doesn't match the job, don't be afraid to walk away from it. A lot of people actually get trapped in a job that they hate because they couldn't wait for the right job to come along, something that actually fit them. You don't want to get caught in that. So if you don't match the job, don't try to be all things to all people. So that's another thing that this phone call helps us to determine. And after you do this, it's time to go ahead and cut to the chase. Tell them that you want to submit a resume, and then right there, ask them for an interview. You're also going to ask them what format that they want the resume in. Maybe they want it emailed, or they want you to actually physically mail it. If they accept both, give them both. So if they say you can mail it or you can email it, then send them an email with the resume attached and put one in the mail. And make sure you double check that you've got the full address of the person that you're talking to. And if you're talking to a third party, for example, someone in human resources, go ahead and send them a copy of the resume as well. If you happen to get through to the hiring manager, ask them if you should send a copy of your resume directly to them or to the HR department, or again, both. You want to do this because if company policy allows it, you want to get that resume directly in front of the hiring manager, because there's always a chance somebody in HR could overlook it or just not take a fancy to it, and they might not ever forward it to the hiring manager. So it might get screened out before it gets to that person that you talk to. And then again, ask for the interview. Ask them if it's a good time to set that up, or if possibly you should wait until after they've received the resume. This is a bit assertive, and it can even sound pushy, so you want to be careful with it, and you want to get a good feel during the conversation if it's going to be appropriate. But some hiring managers actually like that assertiveness. Some don't. So again, it's not a hard and fast rule. Remember, practice on a friend and keep that smile on your face throughout the whole phone call. Then even if it is a little bit pushy, you're not going to sound like a jerk. And then the last part of our conversation is always going to be a thank you. Let them know you didn't want to waste anybody's time by sending out a resume that didn't match their qualifications. Thank them for taking the time to clarify your questions. Don't be casual. Use Mr. or Ms. as appropriate. And here's some phone tips. This is a pleasant conversation. It's not an interrogation. Keep the tone light, not too light. You don't want to talk to them like they're your best friend. You could come across like a salesman if you do that. And don't drag things out. It should be short and to the point. Because as of right now, you care about them a lot more than they care about you. And I'll just be blunt with that. More than likely, they're very busy. So keep it short and sweet, to the point. And don't forget, to make this effective, you really do need to practice. Write down your notes beforehand so that you've got them there in front of you. That way you know what's going on with the company. But absolutely don't use it as a script. You don't want to sound like you're reading your questions. And of course, you need to be flexible. If the phone call should take a different direction, you want to be able to have that flexibility that you can move with it. And then as soon as you hang up, write down any terminology that they used. Did they say workshops, or did they say classes or seminars? Did they say construction, maintenance, or design? Then you're going to be able to use those keywords to design the resume specifically from their perspective. Bear in mind that if there was something on their website that used terminology like workshops, but the hiring manager that you talked to said classes, the website obviously could have been put up by someone that's into website design. They might use different terminology. So if things show up and you get conflicting information, cater it to the hiring manager. And I can't stress enough how important this phone call is. You're talking with somebody that could have some insight into what's going on inside the company. And you're starting groundwork for building a relationship with them. And in fact, you're plowing the ground for your resume to arrive later on. You could hang up the phone with them, and they could literally call the HR department and say, as soon as this resume arrives, I want it on my desk. So this is a very important call. And like I said before, another thing that we're doing here is finding out if we're really qualified for the job and if, in fact, we really do want that job. You might find out that you're not qualified, or maybe you need to brush up on a certain area of your skill set, or maybe you just don't want the job. But the only way you're going to find out all of that is to actually make that call. And I want to stress one more time. You're talking to somebody who's probably very busy. They don't have a lot of time on their hands, whether that's a recruiter or it's the actual hiring manager or someone that's in the human resources department. They're probably overworked, overstressed, and they've got very little time on their hands. Also, if they make a bad decision and hire somebody that's underqualified, that's going to make their life even worse. So make sure if you proceed and you go forward with this, that you're actually qualified for the job. And I briefly mentioned a moment ago, if you do get any kind of conflicting information while you're doing your research, you can usually go with what the hiring manager says. And that's all there is to it. Resume reconnaissance. It's made up of 3 tasks: internet queries, personal observation, and the phone call. Realistically, you could probably get this done in a couple hours. And after you're done, you'll know everything you need in order to understand your student, which is the hiring manager. Up next, I've got a hands-on exercise that I want you to try. It'll help you fine-tune your understanding of a hiring manager's perspective.